Jeff Bezos has one of the most impressive visions in the world, to expand humanity out to space and preserve the Earth as a natural wonder.
I would love to see 1 trillion humans living in the solar system, and we'll build giant O'Neill-style colonies, and people will live in those.
But he doesn't want to do it alone. He wants to provide infrastructure to the rest of the world so that we can build it together, in the same way as he did with Amazon Web Services, or similar to how he used FedEx to send products to your house.
All these services, it's like a set of APIs. It's a little bit like Amazon Web Services, but for space payloads.
He has built an empire from nothing. He has revolutionized the way that the internet works, and he has been right about most things in his life. But could this time be different? Could he be aiming too high with this space project? I've analyzed word by word all his interviews and conferences, and I've studied his progress at Blue Origin for the past years, and his vision of space has remained the same, very bullish, with a clear purpose and fully aligned with his way of working that made Amazon the giant that it is today. This is the story about Jeff's biggest dream, and the reality behind it. Most people know Jeff Bezos because of his work at Amazon, which is normal. It's his biggest achievement and a company that has changed the way that we buy and sell products across the world. But his most important dream has always been to expand humanity out to space, becoming a 1 trillion people civilization and preserving the Earth as pure as possible. I know, it sounds crazy, but when this comes from a guy that went from nothing to building one of the biggest empires on Earth, you start paying more attention. This has been his dream since he was a child, and it never left his mind. So when he had the money and the chance, he started Blue Origin, his favorite company. The end goal of this project was to have billions of people living in on-oil cylinders across the solar system, using the resources of the other planets, moons and asteroids to build gigantic structures in space that could accommodate millions of people, expanding the human civilization to all the corners of our planetary system. He believes that this is the only way that we humans can continue growing, as the resources of our planet are finite and we will need to reach for the stars if we want to expand. I don't agree with all of this, and I will come back to it later, but what is true is that the human species will eventually need to leave Earth if we want to get bigger as a civilization, in the same way as we explored the whole planet when we had the chance. But why do we want this? Why should we aspire to colonize the solar system? Don't we have enough with this planet? In Jeff's own words,
if we had 1 trillion humans, we would have, at any given time, 1,000 Mozarts and 1,000 Einsteins. Our solar system would be full of life and intelligence and energy.
And that is the key of Jeff's ambitions. He understands that we humans are valuable because of our ability to change our environment, and we should aspire to be as many as we can, as long as we can do it in peace. He sees our species as something beautiful and that needs to expand as much as possible, but he also views us as a civilization that could possibly damage our environment and the planet that we inhabit. This is the main reason why he proposes to take the heavy industry to space, and to eventually allow people to live across the solar system so that we can maintain our precious world as pure as possible. But in order to do that, you need to move a lot of things into orbit, and that is something that he doesn't want to do alone. All these sci-fi dreams of sending millions of people to space are very nice, but they are even less possible than colonizing Mars, which is another crazy idea that another space billionaire has. But Jeff has a plan to do that, and it's not as crazy as it sounds, because he has done something similar before, and it worked perfectly, so why not do it again? Currently, we live in a world where anyone from his home can start a multi-million-dollar business. You can build anything online without having to leave your house. You don't need to worry about servers, about infrastructure, about nothing. You can buy or lease any service you need without having to know a single thing about how it works. But this wasn't always like this. 20 years ago, if you wanted to do the same, you would have needed to buy a bunch of things and build them yourself with your own hands. But then, in 2006, Andy Jassy, an employee at Amazon, presented Jeff a plan to offer the services that they use internally to anyone who needed them. So Amazon Web Services was created, and during all these years, it has become the most valuable piece at Amazon, providing more than 70% of the company's profits. But what are you telling me this? Well, this is exactly the plan that Jeff wants to do for space. He doesn't want to build all the application, he wants to build the capability that allows the rest of the world to use it to do whatever they want. In the same way as Netflix uses AWS without having to worry about all the little things. Jeff's plan is to provide all the necessary hardware as a service to anyone who needs it, so that if you have a good idea and it involves sending something to space, you can build it without having to worry about orbital mechanics, about the extreme temperatures, about communicating with it, about nothing. He wants you to focus only on the task that you are solving, and that you can buy these its resources without having to leave your home, in the same way as today you can have all the web services you need without knowing anything about them. If every app or web developer had to build a large server to maintain their applications, we would have far fewer interesting services available. The same principle applies here in space. Once engineers can focus on the specific problems they need to solve, rather than on all the other tasks that consume much of their time, we will see similar advancements. And for that purpose, Blue Origin is building some hardware that should help future engineers to deploy satellites into space without having to worry about all the little things. Blue Ring is a third stage that combines ion and chemical propulsion to move things around orbit and communicate with them, which is something difficult when you are traveling at several kilometers per second. They should test it on their first orbital launch later this year, and they have other plans to build bigger things like space stations to accommodate scientists and tourists, and also any other service that you could think that may be useful during the next decades. But even though all of this sounds really good, and it's a business model that has worked perfectly before, and even though they have all the money they need to develop these things, there are many problems with this approach that Jeff seems to ignore when he talks about it. Jeff sounds like a broken record when he talks about space, which is normal. Elon and many other successful people usually repeat the same thing again and again. But the problem with Jeff's mantra is that it's not followed by actions. Do as I say, not as I do. He has been explaining his plans to provide space services for many years, and still the only thing that Blue Origin has launched is a suborbital rocket, which is closer to an expensive amusement park than to a proper space trip. And the plans that he has for the bigger New Glenn rocket are not much more ambitious. As I already explained in a previous video, he's building it with traditional and expensive techniques, instead of copying the newer and better approaches that SpaceX and the new space companies are embracing. Even in the best case scenario, where it is successful and they can even recover the first stage, it will be a more expensive rocket than the Falcon 9, and won't be offering any new capability that doesn't already exist. And once Starship is fully operational, Blue Origin will simply be out of the competition to send things into orbit if they haven't been able to compete with the Falcon 9, a rocket that it is already 14 years old. What makes them think that they will be able to compete with Starship? They have much better odds building transfer vehicles between orbits or selling services to communicate with satellites, instead of trying to compete with a complete maniac that won't stop working until the day he dies. Blue Origin needs to do the same as Impulse Space is doing, preparing for a future where Starship is a reality, and think of the necessities that Starship won't cover, so that you can offer something that will be needed and that will have demand. They need to forget about competing with SpaceX and try to work together. Jeff needs to realize that he's already late to this game and that someone else beat him in the race to orbit. Assume it, own it, and go build the next big thing. We will need much more than sending things into orbit, and SpaceX already does that pretty well. So don't try to do the same. Don't try to launch another satellite constellation, or develop a new capsule, or build another heavy-lift rocket. He should focus on the countless things that we will need in the future and that no other company is building now. But even if Jeff changes his mind and starts building the true infrastructure and services that we need in space, there is still another big problem with his long-term vision. At the start of the video I talk about Jeff's vision for the future in space, a future where billions of people live in unknown cylinders and Earth is preserved as pristine as possible. The idea is not that bad, but when you listen to the motivations, things start to get worse. Jeff argues that we will eventually run out of planetary surface, and that's his main reason to move out to orbit. But he doesn't consider that we still have most of our planet empty, and even with the huge growth in population during the past century, the inhabited surface has remained mostly the same. We are more people, but we are also more efficient using the space that we have, and we require less area per person to grow food thanks to technology. He also claims that we will need to move the heavy industry to space, but that doesn't make any sense. You will need to send the materials up there and then send the products down to Earth. For each kilo of material and product, you would be spending 10 kilos of propellant, even with a 100% efficient rocket. The only things that make sense to build in space are the things that have to remain there and that use materials from the moon or asteroids. So basically, before moving any type of industry there, you need to be able to extract huge amounts of materials from space and to have lots of people living there so that they can use the products that are produced. Otherwise, it will always be better, cheaper, and cleaner to produce those products on Earth. The future that he imagines with large space stations in orbit is not something impossible, and probably someday we will get there. But before that, we will need to colonize the Moon and Mars, and even build bases on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. There is no way to move millions of people into unknown cylinders before we have huge colonies in the other planets, because the materials for these colonies will have to come from somewhere. They are not floating in low Earth orbit waiting for us to arrive. I understand his dream and his ambitions, but those are the same as he had when he was a child, and usually ideas need to mature with time and become more feasible. I also understand that there is already another person whose dream is to colonize Mars, so it would be difficult to have the same goal. But if we want to expand humanity out of Earth in a realistic way, we need to have this type of conversations and approach the problem with arguments and a practical plan, not with the fantasies that we had when we were kids. But what do you think? Is Jeff's plan out of his mind, or do you find it more realistic than I do? Leave a comment with with your thoughts and subscribe if you want more of this. And as always, take care and learn more.